Hello, church. So here's our devotional for Wednesday, May 13th. Yesterday, we had our introduction to the book of Ecclesiastes. I mentioned and mispronounced one of the names that's connected to that book. So you can kind of consider this extended introduction time. There are several pieces that Towner uses that I think can be really helpful before coming in the book. So we'll work through a little bit of stuff before we actually get into the meat of the scripture. The title that we sometimes encounter is taken from a word that we find repeated throughout Ecclesiastes, and it's Qohelet. The word very often is translated, I think, in our SV as the teacher. We often encounter it as the preacher. What Peterson does with it is he continues on the alliteration of the transliterated Q, and so he calls it the quester, which is kind of a fun little nuance. But the word is itself just coming from that Hebrew word, and we're kind of ascribing that title as the author. So you will likely be hearing Towner use Qohelet pretty frequently. He did a little more around that, but some of it gets pretty heady into the scholarship. In this particular section, he talks about the book of Ecclesiastes, or Qohelet, in relation to other genres of biblical literature, and particularly related to the wisdom literature that we have. So here's a little background from him. The book of Ecclesiastes belongs to that third part of the canon of the Hebrew scriptures known as the Ketubim, or writings. Into this section of the Bible, the scribes of ancient Israel gathered all sacred texts that were neither Torah, which is law, nor prophets. Ezra, Nehemiah, and the books of Chronicles as late historical writings, the book of Psalms, hymns of the Second Temple, those certain ones such as Psalms 1, 37, 49, 73, 112, and 128 are recognized as wisdom psalms. Lamentations, a collection of laments or dirges over the loss of Judah that are traditionally treated as an appendix to Jeremiah. Daniel, placed among the prophets in the order of the Christian canon, because Daniel is a prophetic book, or we'll use the big phrase apocalyptic book. That's how it gets listed in our Old Testaments. Ruth and Esther, which are short stories, and the Song of Songs, nuptial poetry. Only the remaining three writings, Proverbs, Job, and Ecclesiastes, remain in the true wisdom canon of the Hebrew Bible. That Ecclesiastes belongs in the company of Job and Proverbs cannot be doubted. The genres of writing, the strongly secular perspective, the sophisticated quarrel with conventional piety and theology, all belong to the effort of wisdom writers to make sense of life based on observation and practical experience. Like all of wisdom literature, both courtly and popular, the focus is on human nature, and the goal is to guide human beings into the path of successful living. A manual for living is Eugene Peterson used for Proverbs. Rules of proper behavior, i.e. etiquette, observations of natural phenomenon, like some of the nature references and fable kind of things that we heard, and even some sustained theological reflections, such as those on Dame Wisdom in Proverbs 1-9, and on theodicy, the thought of evil happening in the book of Job, are the stuff of the classical writings of Israel. And then we'll just start this next part because I didn't want to get too deep into the scholarship. The world of wisdom, however, stretched far beyond the narrow borders of Israel. Any reflection on the wisdom bed in which Ecclesiastes nestles, therefore, has to take account of this larger environment. The relationship was richer and more complex than a few sentences can indicate. He goes on to give an example. If you have ever run across the name Gilgamesh, so this is a heroic story coming out of Mesopotamia, but he lays out some similarities. And so as people are approaching wisdom across cultures, there can be similarities and reflections. We find more skepticism in some of those broader cultures than Israel. And we did encounter too in Proverbs those words of Ben Agur, and this response between the skeptic and the believer, depending on where you were coming at, as Van Leeuwen and Peterson, you kind of uplifted both sides of that translation question. So that's the part that I wanted to share with you on wisdom literature to get us set up. There is probably at least one more section we'll be doing before getting into Ecclesiastes itself. And yes, this is a book that I feel that I need to give a lot of prefaces for before we jump in. I did really appreciate the comment from Towner on the similarities between Job and the Ecclesiastes. Just these very deep questions of experience and mortality, faithfulness to God, even when times are not good. So yeah, and we'll keep working on that and see where we land. All right, so have a wonderful day. We'll be catching up with you tomorrow, and we will see you then. Bye.